The Nephilim stand as one of the most enigmatic and debated subjects in the entirety of biblical history, sparking endless curiosity among scholars, theologians, and casual readers alike. To understand who they truly were, one must look past the modern myths and return to the primary source of their mention in Genesis 6:4. This passage describes a time before the Great Flood when the Nephilim were present on the earth, identifying them as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. These beings were characterized as mighty men of old, men of renown, possessing a status and strength that distinguished them from ordinary humanity. In the Hebrew language, the word Nephilim is often associated with the root naphal, meaning to fall, which leads to two primary interpretations: that they were physical giants or that they were fallen ones. This linguistic ambiguity is the foundation upon which three major theological positions have been built over centuries of study. The first and perhaps most sensational position holds that the Nephilim were the literal offspring of fallen angels and human women. Proponents of this view argue that the sons of God mentioned in Genesis refer to angelic beings who left their natural state to intermingle with humanity. This interpretation suggests a supernatural origin for the Nephilim, explaining their extraordinary size and strength as a result of divine or demonic genetics. This perspective is heavily supported by extra-biblical texts like the Book of Enoch, which provides a detailed narrative of watchers descending to earth. For many, this view explains why the Great Flood was necessary: to purge the earth of a corrupted bloodline that was no longer fully human. It paints a picture of a world where the boundary between the spiritual and physical realms had collapsed, leading to the rise of a hybrid race of warrior giants. The second position offers a more grounded humanistic explanation, suggesting that the Nephilim were the ungodly descendants of Cain. In this view, the sons of God are not angels, but rather the righteous lineage of Seth, while the daughters of men represent the rebellious line of Cain. The Nephilim, therefore, were the children produced when these two distinct groups intermarried, resulting in a generation that abandoned the worship of God for the pursuit of power and earthly glory. This theory avoids the supernatural complexities of angelic procreation and focuses instead on the moral and spiritual decay of humanity. It posits that their greatness, or might, was a matter of physical prowess and military dominance rather than magical or celestial heritage. This view emphasizes the biblical theme of the danger of unholy alliances and the gradual erosion of godly heritage through worldly influence. The third position suggests that the Nephilim were a group of people completely independent from the union of the sons of God and daughters of men. By looking closely at the phrasing of Genesis 6:4, which states that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, some scholars believe they were simply a race of giants who already existed as descendants of Adam and Eve. Under this interpretation, the Nephilim were not necessarily the result of the specific unions mentioned in the text, but were contemporaneous with them. They were legendary warriors or tyrants whose physical stature made them famous, or infamous, throughout the ancient world. This view treats the Nephilim as a natural, albeit extraordinary, part of human biological diversity in the pre-flood era, rather than a supernatural anomaly or a product of specific genealogical mixing. Regardless of which origin story one finds most compelling, the Bible provides specific facts that help anchor our understanding of these figures. The first major fact is that the Nephilim were indeed recognized as giants both before and after the flood. While Genesis introduces them, the book of Numbers provides a more vivid physical description. In Numbers 13, the Israelite spies sent into the land of Canaan returned with a terrifying report. They claimed the land devours its inhabitants, and that all the people they saw were of great height. Specifically, They mentioned seeing the descendants of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. The spies famously stated that they felt like grasshoppers in comparison to these beings. This reinforces the idea that the Nephilim were not just spiritually fallen, but were physically imposing creatures whose presence struck fear into the hearts of trained soldiers. The term used to describe them, Gibberim, further illuminates their nature. Translated as mighty men or warriors, this term is used elsewhere in the Bible to describe formidable figures like Nimrod, the architect of the Tower of Babel, and even Goliath of Gath. By labeling the Nephilim as Gibberim, the text highlights their strength, their skill in battle, and their elite status in ancient society. They were the men of renown, the celebrities of the ancient world whose exploits in war and conquest were passed down through oral traditions. This suggests that the Nephilim were not just passive giants, but active participants in the violence and corruption that eventually led God to grieve over the state of the world. Their era was defined by a culture of power where might made right, and their physical advantages allowed them to dominate the social landscape. The presence of Nephilim traits after the flood is a point of significant interest and historical continuity. If the flood destroyed all life except for those on the ark, how did the Nephilim return? One common theory suggests that the genetic traits for gigantism were carried through the line of Ham, specifically through his son Canaan. After the flood, Ham's family settled in the regions that would later become the Promised Land. This genealogical link provides a bridge between the antediluvian Nephilim and the post-flood groups like the Anakim, Rephaim, and Emim. These tribes occupied the fortified cities that the Israelites encountered centuries later. This continuity suggests that the struggle against the Nephilim was not just a one-time event before the flood, but a recurring theme in the history of God's people as they sought to reclaim the land promised to Abraham. The timeline of the Nephilim moves from the mysterious origins in Genesis to a very practical military reality in the books of Moses and Joshua. When the Israelites refused to enter Canaan because of their fear of the giants, they were sentenced to wander the desert for 40 years. This delay highlights the psychological impact the Nephilim had on humanity. Their size was a direct challenge to the faith of Israel. However, the next generation, led by Joshua and Caleb, finally faced these giants. Through a series of divine conquests, the Israelites began to drive the descendants of the Nephilim out of their mountain strongholds. While many were destroyed, some remnants fled to the Philistine coastal cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. This migration is crucial because it sets the stage for the most famous giant slayer in history, David. By the time of King David, the Nephilim lineage had been reduced to a few elite champions within the Philistine army. Goliath of Gath is the most prominent example, described as standing over 9 feet tall with armor and weaponry that no ordinary man could carry. David's victory over Goliath was more than just a military upset. It was a spiritual triumph over the ancient fear that had paralyzed his ancestors. But David did not stop with Goliath. The scriptures record that David and his mighty men, his own version of the Gibberim, systematically hunted down and killed the remaining giants of Gath. These included Ishbi-Benob, whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, and a nameless giant with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. This final purge marked the conclusion of the Nephilim era, as these men of renown were finally wiped from the earth by the hand of David and his servants. Understanding the history of the Nephilim is fascinating, but the biblical narrative also warns against becoming overly obsessed with the mysteries and genealogies surrounding them. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul instructed Titus to avoid foolish controversies and genealogies, noting that they are often unprofitable and worthless. This is a vital reminder for modern seekers. While it is tempting to get lost in conspiracy theories about aliens, DNA manipulation, or the secret return of the Nephilim in the modern age, the primary focus of the believer should remain on the sovereignty of God. The story of the Nephilim in the Bible is not intended to spark fear or curiosity about the occult, but to demonstrate that no enemy, no matter how large or powerful, can stand against the will of the Creator. The spiritual application of the Nephilim account is one of encouragement rather than dread. For many, the Nephilim represent the giants in our own lives, problems, addictions, or spiritual oppression that seem insurmountable and make us feel like grasshoppers. The historical record shows that God empowered ordinary men like Joshua, Caleb, and David to overcome these extraordinary threats. The victory was never about the size of the man, but the size of the God backing him. Therefore, the study of the Nephilim should lead us toward a greater fear of the Lord, rather than a fear of the demonic or the unknown. As Isaiah 8:12-13 says, we should not call everything a conspiracy or live in dread of what frightens the world. Instead, we are to make the Lord of heaven's armies the one we fear. Ultimately, the Nephilim serve as a testament to the fact that the battle against darkness is already won. Whether they were fallen angels, the line of Cain, or a race of ancient titans, they were ultimately cleared from the stage of history to make way for the purposes of God. Their story begins with corruption and falling, but the biblical record ends with their total defeat at the hands of those who trusted in the Lord. This perspective shifts our focus from the shadows of the past to the light of the present. We are reminded that the same God who guided David's stone and Joshua's sword is present today to help us face our own giants. Perfect love casts out fear, and the historical reality of the Nephilim's defeat provides a solid foundation for that confidence. In conclusion, the Nephilim are a bridge between the supernatural and the historical, representing a time when the world was filled with legendary mighty men. By examining the three positions on their origin, their physical characteristics as giants, their continuity through the line of Ham, and their final defeat by David's army, we gain a comprehensive view of their role in the biblical drama. They were key characters who tested the faith of Israel and served as a backdrop for God's power. While the mysteries of their genetics or their exact nature may never be fully solved this side of heaven, their legacy is clear. They were a formidable foe that proved God's faithfulness. We should remember them not with a sense of lingering dread, but as a reminder that no power on earth or below it is greater than the Lord of hosts. Through this lens, the study of the Nephilim becomes not a distraction, but a powerful lesson in spiritual warfare and the ultimate victory of the kingdom of God.